So thanks for everyone who's joined us tonight for our second week of this Kalakars Talk conversation series that we've got going on. I'm super excited about this team that we've got with us. So tonight we've got Aneesh Chaganthi, Seb Ohanian, and Natalie Kasabian. How do I pronounce it?
Kasabian.
Kasabian. So Aneesh is the writer or co-writer and director of Searching. Premiered at 2018 Sundance Film Festival. He co-wrote the movie with Sev, who is a producer who's worked on several films, including Fruitvale Station, The Intervention, Yosemite. And the film was produced by Natalie, who is a constant collaborator of the Duplass brothers. She also produced All About Nina, starring Mary Elizabeth Winstead and Common. And the team's latest project is Run, starring Sarah Paulson. But tonight we're going to really focus on Searching. I don't know if everyone in the room has seen it, but it's one of my favorite films from last year. I think it's a brilliant film, intensely gripping and innovative in a lot of ways. So for those of you who don't know, the film is a mystery thriller. It's set entirely on computer screens and smartphones, and it follows a father who is trying to find his missing daughter, and it stars John Cho and Deborah Messing. So I'm just going to jump right into it, guys. And before I start, thanks, Lupika. Just for everyone who's joined us, we're going to just do our conversation, and at the end of the conversation, we'll start unmuting some folks to ask their questions directly to the filmmakers. So yeah, I'm going to jump right into it. Aneesh, you've got a pretty incredible story about how you started in film. You went to USC. You had this opportunity with Google Glass. I believe Seb brought you on board for that. Could you tell us about that? And I've heard that you were supposed to make a music video, and that didn't become a music video. Instead, it was Seeds. So yeah, could you kind of jump into that?
Totally. Yeah, first of all, thanks everyone for joining. This is really cool. I like when you scroll by multiple pages of a Zoom meeting, it's like really daunting, but it's okay. Anyways, hi. So yeah, the story of Seeds is pretty much the beginning of my career. And I think like in a lot of ways, the short film that we made that I'm about to tell you about is pretty much the reason that anything now happened. And I feel like I have a career, because that was like, everyone kind of needs a first domino to fall. And in a lot of ways, like for me, that was the first domino. And so the backstory of this is basically, and Sev, jump in anytime, but Sev and I had recently become writing collaborators. And I had just graduated USC Film School as an undergrad. He had just graduated USC Film School as a grad student. And he was a star producer at the time. He had just come back from Sundance, having won the film festival with a movie called Fruitvale Station, which at the time he was part of it. You know, when he made it, it was just a small little unknown movie, and then obviously kind of blew up into what it became. So he kind of was like the star producer grad student, and I was the lucky kid who somehow was able to write with him.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's the lucky one. No, okay. But you know, we were writing together, and basically Google Glass, which for those of you guys who do remember it or don't remember it, it was like this pair of glasses with a camera up front. Had about a year where they were kind of in the spotlight before they went down in flames. And this was sort of in the middle of that year, where they were still kind of relevant, and their name was sort of dying because the word Glasshole started to become popular, all this stuff. So Google Glass, this bastard child of Google, basically gave out the Google Glass to a bunch of film schools, Northwestern, NYU, USC, UCLA, and told the faculty to sort of give it to a couple students who they thought could make something like a technical demo to prove that it was a viable filmmaking device, which it's obviously not. But you know, USC gave it to a faculty member who was overseeing it, who gave it to Sev, this producer who had just graduated, and basically told Sev to put together 2 or 3 projects, but here are the scripts. And so they gave Sev 3 pre-written scripts that were already approved by the faculty, approved by the staff, approved by the school, whatever, to go off and make them. And I at this point in our relationship, Sev and I had never worked together as a writer, or sorry, as a director and a producer. So like I first had to prove to him that I really could do this. I could do this. I could do this. And after a while, after that was successful, I kind of pitched onto this project and won one of the projects. And the script that we got to make one of these Google Glass videos was a script for a death metal music video, nice. Which we never ended up making. But we had it for 2 weeks, and the budget for this project was $1,500. And I spent basically 2 weeks looking at the script for this death metal music video and being like, why are we making a death metal music video? Before I asked Sev, why are we making a death metal music video? And I went on the YouTube channel for Google Glass and looked at their page, and there was like no commercials. And I was like, why don't they have a commercial for this? Like, you know, this is crazy. And then I told Sev, I was like, why don't we just like not make this and make them an idea that could like double as a short film and a commercial, and basically make them a commercial without them ever asking for it. Worst case, no one sees it. Best case, it's theirs. They adopt it. They put it out into the world. Crazy idea, but Sev was like, all right, let's do it. So what's your idea? And then I basically spent a few days trying to think about what were the resources that I had that nobody else had that we could kind of exploit and make something really, really cool. And for me, you know, I have family who lives in Hyderabad in southern India. And I was like, I go there every summer, and I was like, okay, if we make something there, $1,500 can go a lot farther there. Like, it's just a lot of production value. I could do something there. I could use my family, blah, blah, blah. So basically we, in a little bit of a conniving way that we don't need to go into too many details about, somehow basically switched tracks from a death metal music video into this other project, and used all $1,500 of the budget to basically put me on a round trip flight where I wore like the same clothes and a wedding ring for 2 weeks and shot this video that we came back to the States, edited into a 2.5-minute video, and showed it to Sev. And he was like, oh my gosh, how do we figure this out? Turns out Mother's Day was 2 weeks away from that. It's actually this week,
wow.
45 years ago. Yeah, that's crazy. Anyways, so yeah, thank you. But you know, if you've seen the short film, you know how relevant Mother's Day is to that concept. But you know, we were like, whoa, we should find a way to give it to Google for Mother's Day. Maybe they could put it up on their channel. And USC was not a fan of any of the short film, this idea, the whole thing behind it. So we kind of had to like go around, and we ended up finding a way to get drinks with somebody at Google, showed this to them, totally acted cool when they were like, hey, can I forward this to a couple of my coworkers? And they did, and they started sending us the forward responses. Everyone was crazy about it. And eventually we got asked if they could put it on their own Google channel for Mother's Day. And it felt like we had just pulled off this heist, and they put it on their YouTube channel on Mother's Day. And this totally random video basically went viral that weekend. We got like 1 million hits in a day, 2 million by the weekend. Sev was on TV. We were in like Times of India and like USA Today. And I got basically a call that Monday from Real Google, who had seen the commercial and basically offered me a job at the Creative Lab, which is in New York City, at the Google offices there, where I would spend or I said yes to the job, but it was basically spending like 2 years writing, developing, and directing Google commercials. So that was sort of like that was the gig that eventually sort of allowed searching to happen, or like at least allowed people to believe that I can make searching, and then searching led to everything else. So it was that one little short film that, you know, I felt like was Seven Eye's first sort of like excursion. This is if it's like BC and AD, this is like PN, this is pre-nat, you know, like, so this is at year zero is when we made searching, and Nat came on board, and now everything is also PN post-nat. Anyways, okay.
It sounds like you guys are risk takers, obviously, with doing that whole entire process to get seeds done and not following the script there, what Google had given to you guys, and then going out of the box and making searching. Before we get there, Sev, I'd love to know sort of what made you choose Aneesh as a partner to do this project with Google and beyond that.
I mean, the way Aneesh and I met was, again, at USC Film School. I was there as a grad student, who was there as an undergrad, and to kind of make money, I was TAing a lot. So I would, you know, like when Aneesh was in an undergrad class, I happened to be one of the I was like the lead TA in that class, helping the teacher with the students. And it was in that case, you know, Aneesh went to USC wanting to be a director, but USC has a structure that in order to direct a thesis film, you have to first crew on it in a different position. So I was a producing teacher's assistant, and Anish was a producing student at the time. And I remember like when I was in that class, like I was able to work closely with the students, and I could see like who was good, who was bad. Like there was this one student who like had all the best ideas, great personality, like honestly just a good attitude as far as like problem solving, and like, that student and I were just so like on the same page creatively. And I was like, all right, if I'm going to make a project, I want to work with this student. But he didn't want to work with me. So I ended up just asking Aneesh instead. I've said that joke like 6,000 times. I know all 55 of you guys who are not on video are cracking up right now, and I appreciate it. No, but like everything I just said was true. Like Aneesh, like when we were in class, like it was just evident that like Aneesh and I were like on the same wavelength as far as like we wanted to tell like cool, engaging, compelling stories that had a lot of heart and emotion. We didn't feel too pretentious. Like we wanted to make art that audiences can enjoy everywhere. And if I'm being really honest, like it was us writing together that kind of like gave me the instinct that like Aneesh is a hardworking guy. Like, like he has an incredible work ethic and just really strong ideas. And like, to be honest with you guys, like it wasn't like I was giving him a gift. It was like, hey man, do you want to take this like aging, dying technology that's gonna never actually work and like try and make something out of it? And the fact that he was on board, I think again spoke volumes, spoke a lot of volume about like just his faith in just telling good stories. Because like what I think Aneesh didn't mention to you guys is when he came up with this idea to change this like death metal music video and instead come up with this pitch where like he would go to India and like take this like advanced tech into like wherever, like he didn't just email me or text me. He was like, hey man, I got to come tell you in person. But he was telling me that at midnight. So like he literally drove to my place in the middle of the night and like knocked on my door and pitched it to me like it's almost like out of a movie. And I was like, dude, if we can pull this off, like hell yeah, can we pull it off? But yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah, definitely answers my question. I mean, it kind of speaks to obviously Aneesh's work ethic and his creativity. Talking about becoming partners, can you walk us through the process of writing the film as partners? So I've read and heard this idea of a scriptment, as Aneesh had put it in some interview I had seen. Can you walk us through that process?
Yeah, I could just really quickly just catch up to where Aneesh left it. I mean, he had gone to New York working at Google. I was in LA making indie films. That's when Natalie and I linked up and started producing a bunch of indie films together. And I had a meeting with a company called Basilevs. They had just produced and financed a movie called Unfriended, which is a horror film that takes place on computer screens. In my meeting with them, basically, they basically were like, we want to tell similar stories that take place on computers. Would you want to be doing anything like that with us? I immediately thought of Aneesh because, again, we were writing partners. I knew his creativity. And he happened to be working at Google, where a lot of the stuff he was doing was like using screens and technology. He happened to be in LA that week for a photo shoot you were doing for Google, I think, Aneesh. So I was like, hey, dude, like I just had this meeting. Like, can you hold off and fly back to New York? Just come take this one meeting with me. We came in together. We had this meeting with those guys, and they were like, we would love for you guys to like pitch us a short film that would take place on a computer screen. Because their idea was, as a company, because Unfriended was successful, they would make a full-length feature film with 8 short films. And Aneesh and I were like already trying to come up with a feature film that we would write that he could direct. And we were kind of playing around with some ideas. But we were like, this sounds like a fun exercise in the meanwhile. And we came up with the idea for Searching as an 8-minute short film, which like maybe sounds crazy now, but like at the time we thought it would be crazy to take that short and make it into a feature. We sent the short to this company. They had us come in again. And this time, Aneesh happened to be in LA again. The meeting was kind of a different vibe. Now it was like this boardroom. There was all these execs, the financiers. And they told us like really devastating news, which was like, we don't want to make the short. And we were really bummed. And then they were like, we'd rather just take this idea and have you guys make it into a feature. Like Sev and Aneesh, you guys would write it. Sev, you would produce it. Aneesh, you would make your first movie as a director. Who would finance the whole thing. What do you guys say? And Aneesh said no. He just like blurted out the word no, which like, I'm like, yo, I'm a broke indie filmmaker. What? I literally kicked them. I genuinely like sitcom style kicked them underneath the table. And I was like, he means no problem. No way. Like, and I think like we, and to Aneesh's credit, like I don't want to speak for you, Aneesh, but like he was basically like, if I'm going to make my first feature as a director, I would not want to make it as a gimmick. And this thing that we really cool, like we had this cool concept for Search, stretching it into a feature film, it would kind of feel like a repeat of Unfriended. Like it was not, and I think we had actually seen Unfriended and we weren't crazy about that film. I just tried to do my best as a producer, and I was like, I think Aneesh means we want to talk about it and think about it, and we'll get back to you guys.
Yeah.
And that ultimately led us to, coming up with a really cool end to the movie. And for those who've seen the movie, we have a cool opening 5 minutes that's really emotional and compelling, and it kind of immediately sells you on this concept can work as a cinematic piece of art. And then I'll let Aneesh answer a bit more about how we actually wrote the thing, but that's how we got to that part.
Yeah. Actually, before we get to writing it, that beginning is really emotional. It kind of jumps right into it. You get to know the family immediately. Obviously, going through the process of the mother's cancer. And somebody in our group, actually Lipika, had said, they pulled an Up on me, and that's what it really felt like. It felt like that film, the beginning of Up, but told on a computer screen and through this family, and it really hit that. But yeah, Aneesh, like if you could kind of tell us sort of about how do you go about writing such an unconventional script that takes place all on the screen?
With difficulty. So I think, the first sort of, the most important thing in the beginning of writing of writing Search was sort of establishing like a very high level philosophy. And that was that in order for this movie to be something that would be palatable or enjoyable or something that people would, want to see, if we were telling a story with such unconventional visuals, we had to really balance it with a very, very conventional plot. And like, despite the way that it's presented, if you kind of take a look back at like the actual structural screenplay foundations of the film, it's very basic. Like it's basically like ripped out of the Save the Cat book, like as far as like what are the plot points that are happening, why they're happening. It's just very like, we could write it down right now. Just what the inciting incident is, like opening images, break to two, midpoint, blah, 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 all that stuff, like fun and games. Like it's very, very simple. So we kind of had that philosophy as like, for as complicated as this is going to look, let's just balance it out with something that's very conventional. And that marriage hopefully is what is going to make something quite interesting. So from the beginning, the first thing that we did was, rather than look at this as like a screen movie, look at it as like a normal movie, like forget the fact that it was a movie that took place on screens. This is a movie about a dad and a daughter. The daughter goes missing, and the dad realizes over the course of looking for her that he actually never knew her. What are the beats of that story? Like where does that dad realize it was all his fault? Where does the girl go missing? Where does he start to investigate on his own? Where does the police, like, where does that B story come in? It's really just sort of understanding where the first major plot points came into the picture. And then from there, after we had that basic structure, from then we started to look at like, okay, what is the screen way of doing this movie? Because that's what's going to make this movie set apart. For that scene that we knew that was going to happen in the 2A in our fun and games, where like the dad is knocking on people's doors and like starting his little wall where like all the wires are connecting to the wires and like postcards are lit up. It's like, or pinned to a wall. It's like, what is that version of in this film? And for us, it was like, okay, it's a spreadsheet. It's a Google spreadsheet. It's his desktop getting crazy. Like we had to basically translate every beat, and like knocking on people's doors and showing a photo of your daughter in this version is texting them, reaching out on Facebook, using FaceTime, like kind of using all of these different little screen world versions of it to translate beats that we knew had already worked on a story level, not the other way around. Yeah. And I think like that to us was the biggest way in, is just like make sure the story works, and then figure out, look at the UI of a computer, the word share, the word delete, the word empty trash, and just see where in your existing story those words would make the most sense, and then slowly start to like seep it in, and then from there kind of just do treatments and passes and kind of get to the final product.
Yeah. Actually, talking about treatments and passes, so Natalie, producing such a film, like it must be so difficult to have to tear this apart as a producer, and figuring out the assets and figuring out the set and all that. How did you kind of go about doing that, of putting this film together?
Yeah, and I don't know if we mentioned at the top, but Seth produced it as well. We did it together. But so interestingly enough, the guys, after we officially said yes, the guys went in and they wrote out the movie in what we were calling a scriptment. So it wasn't in traditional like final draft form. It was basically a Word document. It was like 40 or 50 pages. And so they were so excited. They finally finished. They were ready for me to read it. They send it over. I read it. It's great. You know, give my thoughts. And then says like, all right, we got to break it down. Like we got to see how many days we need. What kind of budget do we need? Like, let's fucking go. And I'm like, great. And I'm looking at this Word document. I'm like, how the fuck do I break this down? Excuse my French. So the first thing I did was ask them to go back and essentially rewrite or translate that 50 pages into an actual final draft document, because it was basically impossible. It was like, we're in FaceTime, we're looking at chat. I'm like, what's live action, what's not? So they basically took that and they came up with their own way of adapting it into final draft. And basically every single thing that was live action, I just like extrapolated that. And we kind of treated it almost at that phase, you know, in prep as like two separate things. Like this is all the animated stuff and this is the live action stuff. And I was really spearheading that. And at the same time, we were parallel pathing this, like what we call previs. So basically, I think Seth came up with this idea that, you know, why don't we make, since so much of the movie is animated and screen elements, why not start making, you know, those sections of the film? So 8 weeks before we started principal photography, we had 2 editors in a little room cutting, you know, with no live action footage. They basically started with a blank sheet and basically started screen capturing like Facebook and all the different apps that we show in the movie and like roughed together this version. And Aneesh basically acted out like every single role. And this cut exists. One day we'll release it if Aneesh ever
nice.
Including the 16-year-old teenage girl. It was an incredible performance.
It was amazing. every role, like pitching his voice up and down to play like girls and guys. And so, yeah, so we were like parallel pathing. So like I'm on one end, you know, prepping physical production, which we squeezed into 13 days somehow. It was kind of wild because we had it was very low budget. We were under $1 million. And then, you know, we had the editors kind of previewing on this end. So it was pretty wild. It was unlike anything we'd ever done. You know, Sev and I had an indie background and, you know, I'd done low budget things, but this was definitely like, here's a script that literally doesn't even look like a script and like make this into a movie that's not going to look like anything else you've ever seen. But that's what was exciting about it. And I think we all as a team definitely grew from that experience.
Yeah. Actually, talking about screens, this is a question from Swetha. How did that affect the way you were directing actors, Aneesh?
Yeah, you know, it's funny. It's like just as an overall principle, it's like every single element of making this movie, everyone doing it sort of had to like relearn elements of their job to make this thing. Like from me to Nat to Sev to like the sound guy, you know, it's just every single person was sort of like adjusting the way they worked, which is like a really cool element of this movie. But from like a directing process, you know, so much of this film is like the character who's using this computer for the majority of the movie is John Cho's character, the dad. And like, in order for him to be acting properly, he needs to know where he needs to know where to look. And that's one of the reasons we made, you know, that animatic that Nat was talking about, is that like on top of making the whole movie and understanding the beats and everything, John, the character, needs to know where every message is popping up, where every like, you know, chat is happening, where every notification's coming, like where he has to move the cursor, how slowly, how delicately, blah, blah, blah. So like we had this animatic on set basically, you know, to the right of every actor. And I would basically in between sets be like, okay, or in between takes be like, okay, that was a great performance, but just move the cursor a little bit more left, you know, wow. So your eye line can match. You know, it was like really, really, it felt like a weird combination of this like scientific, logical directing, and then on top of like the normal emotional stuff, you know, and like, it's like a weird,
Sorry, continue.
Yeah, it's like a weird little hybrid between the two. But, you know, and the other element was that a lot of it kind of, we were figuring it out while it was happening. You know, the way that we shot a lot of this GoPros, I mean, the material on screens, was we didn't actually use the FaceTime camera for all of the Skype or like FaceTime footage. And the reason we didn't do that was because you can't hook it up to a separate video village where the filmmakers and all of us can watch the footage. So the only way we could do that was basically by using a GoPro. We wanted to make sure that everything we shot was a similar resolution. We didn't want to shoot this on like an Alexa and then just downgrade it in post like that. That was like a thing that Hollywood movies do, and it always looks fake whenever they do that. You know, I've never seen a Skype as like high resolution as the ones just on movies, you know?
Yeah.
So we were like, okay, let's just shoot this on a GoPro. So we basically, our DP made a rig behind the computer, and it would just kind of sit right above the top of your iMac or the MacBook or any laptop, and it would peek right over. And so it almost looked like the exact same camera. And then we would use that, hook that up. But while we were shooting that, you know, the GoPro is like such a wide lens that like we learned a lot about movement and choreography while we were shooting it. For example, like you won't be able to tell this now, but like, because this isn't the same kind of camera, but like this movement right here of just swinging back and forth is like normal now, but it's extremely accentuated when you're looking at a fisheye, which is what a GoPro is basically shooting it out of. And so a normal movie, you have a lot of latitude here and here, you know, like we'll say like, okay, your frame is here on a normal movie. But like with this movie, you know, it's this and this doesn't feel close to as much of movement as like this and this does. So that's one of the first things that we learned. And basically one of the first things I told John was like, okay, every time you feel like there's like a major beat with your character, or there's like something you're learning or something you're discovering or something that you're kind of whatever, just shift whatever position you're in to the other position. And you'll see that happen all the time in the film, is where John goes like this, and then he gets an idea and goes like this, you know, and like it just feels crazy cool on that. So like a lot of it is just like figuring it out on the day, and then kind of going from there, because like no one really had any idea what we were doing, especially me. You know, this was like my first movie, and I remember I remember like when we were rolling on the first day, I was like, you know, this is like the first normal scene I've ever, like I pretty much I've shot since like high school or college. And so was like, don't say that to anyone else. You know?
Actually, something that you touched on that I really want to talk about was keeping the emotion while being so technical. And I think you hit on it a bit, but when you're writing it on paper, how do you get to the core of the emotion when you're so conscious about the technology that you're writing as well?
Can you repeat that question?
Yeah, so essentially I'm asking, you know, I think knowing that you're going to make this film on a computer screen and being very conscious of the technology behind it, how do you keep the emotion? Because I feel, you know, John's character goes through a very emotional story. Both characters actually do. So how do you kind of make sure that you don't miss that while writing such a technical film?
I mean, Seb, feel free to jump in, but feedback, I don't know, like it's and just keeping that in mind. You know, it's funny, like one of the first, the 2 years that I spent at Google, like we were working on commercials. So I made a lot of commercials and was like in that whole commercial world. And one of the first things that they do, which I think is like something that we've sort of, without really thinking about it, have started doing with our projects. The first thing that they do is make a poster. They like make a poster for the thing that they're making, or the commercial that they're making, or the campaign that we're doing, or whatever. And it's not approved, it's not whatever, but we just put it up on the wall. And it's always a reminder for you to like look back and then be like, is that the thing that we're making? You know, like, and no matter how many decisions that you make, you can always kind of like reference this like as a North Star kind of thing. From early on, you know, we were just very much like, this is a story about a dad who loses his daughter and realizes that he doesn't know her. If a scene is not telling you that, it's not the right scene in the movie. You know, like I think every scene in the film, especially in the first half of the film, up until his conclusion that I don't know, he says right halfway in the movie, he's like, I don't know my daughter, is saying that, making that point. And then everything on the flip side is sort of starting to adjust. I wish it was I wish I had a better answer for that.
No, I guess, and then I guess another follow-up question to that is like, did you know where you were going? Did you guys know at the beginning of writing the script where you guys were going towards the end of it with the big reveal and all that?
Yeah, we knew that had to be, that's the first thing. That's in fact, that was like the moment where we felt like, okay, we had the whole thing. We had that early in the outline stage. I hope we're not spoil whatever. I'm supposed to spoil it, but like.
Oh, and don't spoil it. Don't spoil it.
Okay, you're right.
It's only been something like 2
Okay,
years. People
fine. I won't spoil
at
it.
least
But
2 years.
okay, fine. That's fair. I will say like
Kevin's trying to get those residual checks still. That's what's going on over there.
exactly. Yeah.
Trying to get people to still rent it.
Time
I
matters.
hate spoilers. That's why.
Okay, no spoilers. But we knew the answer, and more importantly, we knew the answer was right early on because we knew that it fell in line with the theme. You know, and like I think like
Yes.
when our story is about a dad who doesn't know his daughter, and a dad who goes to all lengths to kind of protect his child, like what is the right bad guy in that world? And once we felt like we found an answer that was like exactly that like Inverson was talking about the theme in the same way, and we kind of knew we were going from there. Man, that movie would have that would have been all over the place if we had no idea from the beginning. Thankfully we did.
Yeah.
It's one of the few things we did.
Yeah, very cool. And actually, so casting, I know you guys have been asked this question a million times, and John Cho, amazing performance in this. Can you describe why, or the choice behind a Korean American family, and maybe Natalie could also speak about sort of having to fight for that as well. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah, Seb, do you want to kick it off just from a writing perspective? Because they wrote with John in mind. So.
Oh, okay.
Seb, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it was like a group decision, obviously. Like, we're, Natalie and I are Armenian American, and Anisha's Indian American, and we just don't see enough of people who like look like us. I mean, obviously, you guys, I imagine, are very familiar with that in this industry, and we had an opportunity to tell a story that would take place on a computer screen. That's like a murder mystery type of thing. It's like there was no chance of this movie blowing up and ever being a big deal. So like, why not actually cast somebody that like we would want to see in that role? Nat, you could talk about it more, honestly.
Yeah, but we did get a lot of pushback, to be honest, because the question was always, well, there's nothing specific about the story that lends itself to being Korean or Korean American or about a Korean family. And really every time people press that upon us, our response was really, well, like, who cares? Like, it could, that's the entire idea. It's the idea that like this could be any family, and it's not a story about, it's not about diversity, but just by choosing a family that we're not used to seeing on screens, it's making a statement, and like there's plenty of movies that are about diversity. I mean, Seb made one of the ones that made the biggest splash, but those are great, and they have a certain place in this conversation. But for us, it's like to really turn the dial. It's how do you get someone that looks like John, or that's brown or Middle Eastern in like a Mission Impossible type movie? Well, it's by proving that it can be done. And so for us, it was not that we weren't trying to change an industry with one movie, but for us, it was really just why the F not? And we did have to fight for it, shockingly. Like you'd think that people would be more open to it, especially with all the conversations going on. But we did have to fight, but we're definitely glad we did. I mean, I feel like no one could have played that as great as John did.
Yeah, no, he was brilliant in it. And then how did you guys get Deborah on board?
So Deborah, we went through the usual routes, in terms of logistics. It was going to her agent, and Seven, I knew her agent a bit from other projects. So there's like a little bit of a relationship there. And honestly, she got back to us, and she was really excited by it, because I don't think, as she said herself, like she doesn't get offers for many roles like this. She tends, people think of her in more comedic roles. So she was super excited, and she was great. Like, she was such a pro. We were all like, wow, TV actors know their shit. Like, she just showed up and was a total boss.
Also, like, I will say, like, it's a very smart move, lesson learned from the beginning, is to cast people who do not get these opportunities. Because you're not going to cast, no one who gets these opportunities of playing a cop or playing a dad whose kid goes missing is going to say yes when, like, a bunch of nobodies or a nobody is directing this movie, they're just not going to do it. But tell a comedic actress who's played, a sitcom character for 10 plus years or however long, and is a staple there and can't get out of that she's going to play like a dark, like, a detective with a secret of her own, like, then it's much more interesting. Tell John that he's going to play this action lead. It's a lot more interesting. And I think like that was one of the first things that, I learned is like, despite the obstacles that we had, just because like, a lot of us had never made a movie this big, or I had made a movie period. At least me, I had made a feature. Like, there's still so much appeal if you write something right and then cast it for the right person who doesn't get this opportunity. Because if you cast against type, like, that can pay off in spades as long as it doesn't blow up in your face.
Yeah. No, I think it's a great point, especially for our group. We have a lot of first-time feature filmmakers who are getting their films off the ground. So it's definitely great to hear that. Pretty soon, I'm going to start opening it up to the group. So if you do have questions, if you guys can kick it into the host, to the Kalakars host, we'll start unmuting folks. But before we get there, I like to sort of do this rapid fire thing. So it's going to be 5 questions, and we'll go in a circle. We'll start with Natalie, and then we'll go to Seb, and then Aneesh. So Aneesh, you got a little time to think about your answers.
Okay, thank God.
But
appreciate that.
So one book that you would recommend to any filmmaker or to a filmmaker?
There's this book called The Big Picture, and it takes I'm forgetting the author, which is terrible. Seth, if you remember, jump in. It's amazing. It takes all the information from the Sony hack and uses it in an educational way to talk about like the Hollywood of the past 30 years, basically. It's great.
Very cool.
That wasn't rapid
I
fire.
am so happy in that.
That's cool. No,
I'm
that's
so
cool.
happy that Nat said that, because I wanted to give 2 answers. That was one of them. I'm reading a book right now called Creativity Inc., which is written by the founder of Pixar, and it's freaking phenomenal. Like, I mean, I wish I read this thing 10 years ago.
Awesome. Anish?
Any filmmaker, you said, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll go with the non-filmmaking choice. I would pick the book Outliers. I think that's always like, there's a lot of books about how to write a story and how to like structure it well and everything like that. But I think like the question people need to be asking is like how you make it, not like how you tell a good story. And I think like the people who broke out of something did something in a very new way. And like like at least all the people that I know, their origin story, if you want to call it that, was always like not something that was like quote unquote allowed. It was just sort of like a weird deviation of a plan and whatnot. And I think like that's a cool story to like. I'm sure a lot of people have read Outliers, but I think that spirit of that is really important to like when you're trying to like come out fresh.
Yeah,
we're really bad at rapid fire, you guys.
No, that's great. This is great. This is great. The next question is one movie that you find yourself going back to for inspiration.
I think you're up, Nat.
Yeah, you're up.
All right, Pirates of the Caribbean. Not an indie movie, not a super artistic movie, but it's just a phenomenal script. And it is probably the best example of like taking IP and making it fresh and smart. And I love that movie, and I'm not ashamed of it.
For me, it's a movie that I bring up probably every time I'm developing a movie. It's always something I use to give examples on, and it's a very underrated movie, Pleasantville.
Yeah. I would say there's always 3 answers that I give, but I think the movie that I've seen the most in my life is probably Minority Report.
Great movie.
That's a movie I watch more often than not.
Great movie. Our next question is, what is one thing you would tell your younger self?
Trust your gut more. Like genuinely trust your instincts. I know that sounds fluffy, but oftentimes as a producer, your gut says something really strong, and it's usually right.
Cool. Seth?
That's a really good question. I've kind of lived like a perfect life, and it's like everything's gone so well. I'm totally kidding. I would probably say to have spent, I think Anish's advice just now was really profound. Like, I spent a lot of time reading. I'm a big believer in self-education. I spent a lot of time reading like how to write scripts, how to do business, how to blah, blah, blah. And I wish I would have told my younger self to do what I'm doing now. It's like reading more books on like just overall like things that are outside of like success and just more about like, broadening your perspective on the whole world.
Yep. I very similar to that. I'd say like don't get mad at yourself for spending time outside of film. You know, like in whatever way, whether it's literal or figurative, like, because that's the thing that actually gives you something to say, and for obvious reasons. But like whether you're traveling or whether it's reading another book or studying something new, it's like that's like the thing that you cherish the most and actually gives you substance. At least, and I used to do that all the time. Like it's like every time I wasn't on the thing that I was supposed to be on, like I'm wasting my time. And I think like all of that time ended up being so much more important than the stuff that I'm learning that everybody else is learning.
Adil, is it okay that Aneesh just basically stole my answer? Like, does that count?
Yeah, we'll let it go. We'll let it go. Yeah, we'll let it go. Just because he had the courage to come on to a meeting with a mustache on.
Yeah. Damn.
Someone had to say it, Aneesh.
The next question is, and Aneesh, you can't say working at Google, but if you weren't a filmmaker, what would you be?
Ooh.
Oh,
Aneesh, are you supposed to go first? No. I thought you were.
am I going first now?
No, Natalie, go, Natalie.
I heard you like.
Not fair.
I just know what I want. I just know.
Following
Okay, go
because
ahead.
I don't know my answer. No, I do. I would be a hotelier/restaurateur. My dream is like to design spaces and experiences. I guess it's not far off from movies.
Yeah. So,
I would be an endangered species because my other passion was journalism and like writing for newspapers and stuff like that.
very cool.
I would want to work for the State Department and either as an work at another embassy or just like anything that involves foreign relations. I think is really cool.
Oh, cool. And then our last question before we start opening it up is, this is kind of a fun one. We started part of our application process. We always have one fun question. So this one is, if you were a food, what would you be and why?
That's awesome.
Popcorn with Raisinets because it's the perfect balance of salty and sweet.
Nice.
I'm counting that as one food.
Seth?
I feel like I would be, I think I would be an avocado because I think there's something special about me. You know, I feel like I'm hard to understand, hard to get. I think I'm very beautiful at times, but if I'm also very sensitive and I could very quickly go, stale. I think when you get through my first layer, like you'll find that I have this sweet, cushy, yummy, slightly bitter, like taste. But deep down inside, I'm really just kind of a hard person to really get through,
Natalie, is this true? Is this all true, Natalie? No.
I haven't done it for 5 minutes. I was going to keep going, but I'll let Aneesh take over.
Anish, you've got to give us a brown food. You got a whole brown crew here, so you got.
I was about to say I'm going to play to the crowd here. I'm going to say I'm a pani puri. I'm all sweet, spicy, an explosion in your mouth. No, that's the wrong thing to say here. Crunchy, I just like a combination of feelings all at once, and I feel like there's no one thing. It's just all a big mishmash.
Yeah. So before we open it up, I do have to say one thing. I've got to give a shout out to my 12-year-old niece. She's watched your movie like a million times. She's a huge fan. So Marjan, she's also even tuning in. She's not part of Kalakars, but we let her on to watch this. So Marjan.
Oh, what's her name?
Marjan.
Hi, Marjan. I'm going to try and find you.
Well, yeah.
Actually, no. I can't see anyone's face. So,
yeah.
Anyways, hi.
We're going to start opening it up. So I'll start with Pranav. You had a question. If we can unmute Pranav here.
Yeah, hey guys, thank you for doing this. First off,
Of course.
And my question was, what was the reason you started with Microsoft Word and then decided to convert to Final Draft and not just start in Final Draft? And what challenges do you face? Because that's exactly what I'm facing right now. I have about 180 pages in Microsoft Word that I'm trying to put into Final Draft, and yeah, it's something.
Really simple answer. It's only for this project that took place on screens did we start on a Google Doc. If it was any other project, it would have been. Did I freeze? Can you not hear me?
I still have you.
Okay, great. Any other project, we would have written it in final draft immediately. And if your movie is like a live action movie, 100%, you should be switching over to final draft right now. But the reason we wrote on a Google Doc for search was because like interior Facebook photos --Facebook Google Chrome /night doesn't make sense in the context of like how you read a screenplay and stuff. And so for us, we figured early on we should write this in prose. And like kind of Nat was saying, because it was a lot easier for anyone to digest it, for anyone to read this thing, and kind of, you know, understand, you know, how it was supposed to flow. And then once we got into the actual physical production of it, we kind of, as Nat was saying, had to translate it back into a final draft. But if you're writing the live action thing, definitely get back onto final draft as soon as
I just want to say 180 pages is like 100 pages too long. Like trust me, you want it to be 90 pages or less. And like, ideally you want to try and have a method in which you're structuring it in such a way that like, you won't have to write the 180 pages to then have to cut it down. But obviously, like, as you're starting off, like, that stuff happens. I just want to really, like, caution you. Definitely, like, you know, aim for 90 pages. And in this day and age, like, you're not going to get reads much more than that.
Awesome. I'm going to open it up now to Alicia. Let me see. Oh, yeah, she's on.
Hi.
Hi.
Hey.
Hi.
I guess I was just having a question about the pushback that you guys were talking about with casting John. Where were you finding that pushback? Was that during your financing, or was that after you already made the film? I guess I was curious about where that was coming from and why.
If you guys stop recording, we'll tell you the actual answer. But otherwise, it was all great. We're good. Everyone supported it. I mean, it can happen to any phase of the project. You know, in our case, we were lucky that ultimately everybody came on board, obviously. And like, what really helped in our case is like, you know, rather than talking about that, like we started like stressing like examples of like this movement that was starting to happen. And, you know, we put together like a whole deck with John Cho. Like, you know, I'm sure you guys saw like the hashtag starring John Cho movement. We like put all that stuff into a PDF. We like talked about movies that he had been in that had grossed X amount of money. We basically like, we try to use logic and reasoning as much as we could to like convince people that it would be the right decision.
Awesome. And then I'll open it to one more question that we've got here from Micah.
All right.
We might have time for one more film after this, but we'll go one more question after this.
Oh boy, here I am. Okay. So, is there any way to get a name actor on no budget? Are there any grants for short films you'd recommend, or films in general? Do short films have a market now for distribution, and how do you find them?
Nah, I think it's all you.
First question, you might have to remind me what's on the more. First question, can you get a name actor when you don't really have a budget? Yes, you can. Like, actors will work if they like the script, and especially if your story has something to say, actors are all about that. And the way you can make that deal, sometimes, not every time, is like the actors will do the movie for scale if you offer them part of the back end, part of the profit participation. So yeah, there's tons of indie movies that don't have a ton of money that get great actors. Second question was short films. I can't remember. Distribution. There's not really, there's like self-distribution market, like putting your stuff on Vimeo or getting it curated through like all the different pages, which I'm blanking on, but not really. There aren't really people that buy short films anymore, unfortunately. But you know, the best way to use shorts nowadays is like using them as a proof of concept. So if you have a feature idea that you can link to the short film and kind of use the short film to market your feature, that's always really successful. We did that with a feature of mine called All About Nina. We went and shot a short called Join the Club that was like a tonal proof of concept for the movie. And we used that short to help us get the financing for the feature.
And you had Mary Elizabeth Winstead in it?
Not in the short. We had a different actor. Ari Grainer, but it showed financiers specifically that the director, you know, had the chops and could pull off the specific tone. So try to think of your short as a tool rather than like a means to making like a quick buck. It's like a tool to get the ultimate thing off the ground, which should be a feature.
Great. And then I'm going to open it up to Praveen here.
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Hey, I have a question for Aneesh. So Anish, yeah, really great movie, Searching. I watched it. I really loved it. So I have like more on technical side, like how do you use colors in your movies? I mean, is there like something that you plan it during the scripting phase itself, or is it something that you plan it later on once everything is done, the scripting and everything? And I did notice that in Searching, like you're using lots of warm colors, like more on the yellow. I may be wrong, but at least my eyes perceive like I see lots of warm colors. I mean, it's something like it was a choice that when you made the movie.
First of all, if you're able to figure out what the color scheme of Searching was, someone should give you a prize, because I feel like that's the area where I feel like I failed. I try to do colors really well, but you know, the difficulty with Searching is, you know, if Run ever comes out, our next movie, I think it's a lot clearer what the color patterns are in the film. There's really such a simple film. There's 2 colors in the entire movie. It's like green and purple. It's just like everything is dark. The difficulty with Searching is what I wanted to do was like tie a color to every single character. So you saw a lot of yellows because yellow was like Margot's color, or sorry, yellow was Margot's color. It was the mom's color, if I remember correctly. And like whenever mom would get mentioned, we would see that throughout the whole film. The problem was that the movie isn't just the live action footage. If you zoom out, an internet screen has every primary color involved. So it's like really, really hard to show you like evolution of color when we're looking at things that can be any color they want, because that's the way that website already chose to kind of design itself. So it's like really difficult to sort of tell that kind of holistically. But there was an attempt, basically every single character in Searching, Margot, Pam, David, and Vic, the detective, had a color, and you could see those colors kind of go warm and go dark throughout the whole story if you really want to pay attention to it. But I'm very impressed that you even picked out one of that.
Awesome.
But I appreciate the compliment.
I'm gonna try to get one more question here. Can we unmute Swetha?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, thank you all so much for doing this. This was really great. I really loved Searching. I saw it in theaters actually, and that was a really cool experience. Just Aneesh, I'm a fan of like nuggets of wisdom. So I just
wrong person.
Well, I mean, you've been great so far. So, you know, as a first-time director with a directorial debut that's a feature, what would you say your biggest takeaway was that you carried into your next project? Or something that you would have done differently, I guess.
Okay, well, there's done differently, and I think there's things that we did right. But one of the things that I learned basically on Searching that I was more afraid of, but it turned out totally okay, that it was a thing that I actually let go a lot, like of fear. Okay, the sentence doesn't make sense. But one thing that happened on Searching was basically like, you start out with this idea of a movie, and basically like, you haven't have heard me say versions of this, but like when you start off, you're shooting this movie or you're trying to make this movie, it's like you've got this idea in your head, and every day, whether it's through so-and-so, we couldn't get X on set in time. No, they would never say that. They're great producers. But like when they were like, something couldn't happen, or this had to change, or this had to change. Constantly things are changing. And every day your movie changes a little bit. And I think like when you look at the final result, the final product, so many of that is like, so much of those decisions are different than what you originally imagined. When you have that first director's cut that you show, that is like kind of the last time you'll see what you want as like, or what you wanted perfectly to see in your head. Everything after that is like a process of letting go and seeing what works better than that idea. You know, and I think like to realize that the final product of a movie, you're not making, I think, at least for me, what I learned over these movies is like, to get to the best movie, you shouldn't be making your movie. You should be making the movie that movie wants to be, you know? And I think there's definitely a balance between the two, of like trying to make like the thing that, you know, fighting for the things that you love about the film and that you feel like are very expressive. But like, I think there's a point in any, they say this about companies, right? Like the most important point of a history of a company is when they pivot. And I think like it's the same thing when you're in an edit almost. It's like, where did you learn that big thing that changed so much of what your original intention was, but like, this is the way it has to go now. And I think like not being afraid of that and sort of accepting that the final product isn't the way that you see it right now, but that's okay because that's how every movie is made, is sort of like it's a very anxiety reducing self-medication.
Awesome, thanks for that. That actually means a lot. I mean, I think your analogy with the companies in the pivot, I think that's so important. I think people are actually afraid to take that pivot. So it's really nice hearing that from you, who've, you know, you've made a beautiful film with Searching. So I'm gonna start wrapping this up. You know, Natalie, Sev, Aneesh, thank you so much for doing this. It really means a lot to us. You know, we're excited for Run if and when it does come out, which it will. Just to remind everyone that's on here, you know, our next week we've got Sanjuhi Sinha and her producer co-writer Charlotte. Sanjuhi actually went through Kalakars with her short film that was at Cannes and kind of launched her career to make Stray Dolls with Cynthia Nixon. And then the following week, we've got Tony Gilroy, who's a writer-director. He's written almost all the Bourne films, Michael Clayton, Rogue One, all that good stuff. So we hope you guys join for that. We'll be sending out an email for Sanjuhi, and we will go from there. But again, Aneesh, and Natalie and Sev, thank you again so much for doing this. It really was an absolute pleasure. And Natalie, especially you, I know I bugged you for a long time to get this going. But thank you so much.
You're the boss. Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
This is so cool.